Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm so excited to introduce my guest today. We have Jamie Palmer, who is a business strategist and coach for driven entrepreneurs, service providers, and coaches who want to grow and scale their business online with a signature program. Hi, Jamie. Thanks for joining us.
I am so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yay. So let's dive in. Tell us a little bit about your backstory. How did you end up where you are today?
Yeah, so I started my business when I was 20. I was getting ready to graduate with a degree in marketing, and it was 2003. So it was like this crazy recession had hit, and I couldn't find a job. And I decided in my senior year to change my major to accounting so that, like, hey, I could always fall back and be a CPA. But at the time, like, small business websites were really starting to become more and more popular. And so I took a course in website design and said, let me try this out for a while, because at the time I was working at my aunt's embroidery factory, and we had lots of people always coming in and saying, like, oh, do you know where I can get a website? And so it just kind of fell into that by accident. And so that's how my business started. And then we added in social media as a service, kind of when social media began to become popular. And then I would say 2 or 3 years ago, I started to transition into creating programs and courses. And then late 2019, early 2020, I decided to say goodbye to the agency. I was not having fun with it. Was very bored. And I just was like one of those things where a lot of people had this expectation that social media was going to do the selling for them. And one of the things that I always saw was missing is that people, like, they'd have their social media, but it wouldn't really make sense when they went to their website. And then, they'd have, like, it was all a mess. They'd have no systems in place. And so I then just started to help coach people on how to get all of those things to integrate in their business. So it was a more seamless experience for the user, because people love to buy, but they hate to be sold. And when there was all this disjointedness in their online business, I was like, oh man, there's like a massive opportunity there. And so I created this program called Business Ecosystem Builders. I've been running it for more than 3 years now. And it's a fun process where we kind of like get everything in. And that's kind of how I get to where I am today. It's been a wild ride.
Amazing. And so I would love to know, in your experience in working with so many digital entrepreneurs, what are some of the main differences that you've seen in people who have created a lot of success and people who haven't?
Focus. Yeah. I would say focus. And I think for me, since I had the experience really young on in my career working locally, and then I transitioned to all online, one of the biggest things that I saw that was missing with a lot of the online entrepreneurs is they wouldn't take, like, the in-person experience and translate it online. And you still even see this today. So when we would do websites, when I first started my business, it would be like, we'd come in, we do photos, and we take that essence and that feel and that experience, and we would bridge that to the online space. And I think what happens with a lot of online entrepreneurs, especially, is they don't necessarily take the time to really establish a strong brand. They don't tie an emotion to the pictures and the color and the vibe that they want to create. And therefore it looks very disjointed. So, their social media will have one set of colors and their website will have another one. And they'll just be this kind of like mismatching of things. And then, their email list will have another one, and nothing will be like this cohesive look. And whether people or clients articulate it or not, or potential clients articulate it or not, your subconscious brain is like, something's not right here. And so what happens is they'll go to their competition who's got this beautiful, seamless, like really integrated experience online, but might not necessarily be as qualified, but they get that they have to take that and have that feel be throughout everything that they do online. And I think that's probably one of the biggest things that I see people make, especially the people that I work with. Like, I work with a lot of people who are super bright, like super, super bright, like master's degrees, PhDs, like, and they've got like a thriving practice, right? Whatever that might be, but yet they like have sort of fallen short in taking that experience in translating it to the online world. And so that's really, I think, probably the biggest thing that I see that's missing in the online space.
So interesting, especially for somebody like me to think about, because I've pretty much never been in the real world. My entire business journey has been online because I've just been, a digital nomad and traveling around. I've done a few in-person workshops and talks, but it's so funny to think of that, like what translates from the online world to the physical world, and what, just listening to you talk, I'm thinking, I guess your web design is kind of like how you dress when you show up in person. It's like, it doesn't like matter. Like, you can show up in whatever way and still succeed. Like, there are still people who are super successful and dress like they're homeless. And there are people who are making millions of dollars and have really ugly websites. But it's just this kind of like human language and communication, and an area that you really can leverage to help create more connection and influence the way people are perceiving you when they come into your world, I guess.
100%. So I'm a huge fan of the book Blink by Malcolm Gladwell. He talks about this concept of thin slicing. So we do thin slicing, our subconscious brains do thin slicing. So when you meet somebody, it's like that first impression based on your past lived experiences. So you might meet somebody and they might remind you of an ex-boyfriend or girlfriend. Like, that's your thin slice. Well, the same thing happens in the online space. And so you have the ability, as someone who has control over their social media and their marketing and their branding and the story that they tell, to influence that. But oftentimes, I think many entrepreneurs, they either don't really dig deep enough and get intentional about the feelings. Like, I'm very specific. I'm like, I want my brand to express freedom, simplicity, ease. Like, I have my words. I can't remember them off the top of my head, which is terrible right now for this example. But the point is, when somebody experiences your brand, your social media, your website, like, it should express that feeling and it should combat that thin slice, right? And if it's not, right? So if they look at something like, oh, that's just like kind of cheesy, or that's like, oh, that doesn't look like that person's, what's it called? Whether they're actually like, ooh, or they're just, their brain is simply subconsciously processing it, it happens, and that impacts your sales in the online space.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm just thinking, like, reflecting on my own branding process, because I think as somebody who is very intuitive, it's a lot of it has come from, and because I work with people who are super similar to me, and that's, that is my business. It's like, if something resonates with me and I like it and it's my favorite colors, and I feel that it resonates with who I am, then I know that people who will resonate with me will also resonate with me as well.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And I think that just people need to, I agree with that completely. And I'm like a very beachy themed colors and very kind of relaxed, like authentic vibe. And people comment on that all the time, because like my words and my visual branding and my process and my programs they're all in alignment with that. And I think when you can express that online, both with your words and with the visuals, it creates a more cohesive experience. It builds trust faster, and it gets people to move forward quicker.
Right. And I love this part of the conversation too, which is, it doesn't mean everything has to be perfect, but it does mean things have to be cohesive, because that's one of the top things that I get reflected back to me is like, oh, people see the way I do things and they're like, oh, you aren't trying to be perfect. And I like the way that you aren't trying to be perfect, because it gives me permission to do this and not have to struggle to be perfect. And that's been one of the many reasons that I've bought, from previous mentors in the past, is like, oh, she has done this in a super basic way, which means I don't have to slave away or like pay tons of money to a graphic designer to get, my web stuff looking a certain way, as long as it's communicating, it's like cohesive in what it's communicating and the way that it's communicating, so that people, I guess that's just another element of the way that you build trust with people, is just creating that sense of cohesion.
Yeah, 100%. And I think oftentimes I was talking with a client the other day, and we were talking even like the she's getting a photo shoot done. And I was like, well, did you pick out your images? And I mean, your images, your outfits. And she's like, no, I hadn't even thought about that. I'm like, well, you're going to want to, do and wear, like, and it's all these little subtle things that I think that often people miss, that really make the difference between someone who is, especially in the beginning, wildly successful and not so much. And I love, for me, I'm all about like, let's experiment with this for a bit, right? So let's try this on and see how it works. When I did my whole rebrand, I've had like blues and greens as colors for a decade. And I was like, I want it to be slightly more feminine, and I want to like integrate in these colors. And I tried on this logo with this colors, and I did that for a little bit. And I was like, this is just a little bit too much. And then I pulled it back. I changed it a little bit. And then finally I settled on something that felt really good. It resonated. And whenever I start to get feedback from my audience being like, oh, I love blah, 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 I'm always like, yes, that's how I know like I've hit the mark here. And I think oftentimes people want to get all this stuff in place and let me do all these bells and whistles. And it's like way easier to experiment and start with like the lowest common denominator and the most simple thing. Prove that it works, and prove that it's going to work for you, and prove that you're comfortable with that. Then you start to layer on all the other pieces, because ultimately, if you go through all this work and you do this thing, say it's like launching a course as an example. This is what people do all the time. They go through this thing where they launch this whole course and all of this stuff, and they're like, A, I don't even like who I'm supporting. And B, I don't like teaching this in this way. And I'm like, you just wasted like 6 months of your life being miserable because you didn't like experiment a little in the beginning. And I think that's an approach where, for me, I'm not sure if you're into human design at all. Yeah. I'm a 3-5 projector. So I'm all about the trial and error. Like if it's the hard way, I always go that way. Like that's just who I am. I can't help myself. But in that learning, it's also allowed me to help teach other people and shortcut that by being like, yes, go experiment. Like you don't have to belly flop into the pool. You can just like stand on the stairs first before you jump all the way in.
Yeah, I love that. Definitely taking an experimental approach is something that really resonates with me and that I've always done. And I think, because when I started my business, I just finished my master's and I was really broke and I didn't have chunks of money to, invest in building a nice website or having a graphic designer or, doing a fancy photo shoot. So I was really scrappy right off the bat. And just reflecting on it now, I realized that one of the first photo shoots I did with a photographer friend of mine who I paid like $50, and she helped me out as a favor to create some photos for me. And the only clothes that I had that I felt were like nice enough to represent me to the public were a bright pink shirt and a yellow woolly jumper. And for some reason, that in the beginning of my business, I only ever did photo shoots in the winter when it was like really cold. But that those two colors ended up becoming my brand colors, because she took some really great photos and those colors just really stood out. And they were just items of clothing that I had bought because I loved those colors, and I picked them because I felt good in them. I felt they represented me because I loved them. And that was really the beginning of the visual direction for my brand. And it's always has been just me choosing things that make me feel good and that has, and then trying it out, and then obviously, getting feedback on it. And I'm like, oh, okay, so this is working, same as you. And I think that's, it's really key that you resonate with whatever it is that you're putting out there, because it's the same with your messaging. You will then attract people who are a really good fit for you. Even if they don't love everything that you love, if they connect with you on, the more things that you can put out there that you connect with, and feel like is a genuine representation of a part of who you are, the more you'll just start attracting clients that you love working with, and it will allow your business to evolve in a way that's enjoyable, right?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And I mean, I think too, you bring up a good point in that, like, I was so resistant to this when I was in my 20s, because I started my business when I was 20, and I always get a lot of objections in sales, like, oh, you're so young. Like, what do you know about whatever, insert objection here. And it really got inside my head in terms of like, well, how can I change and evolve if I can't even meet this here? And as I started to dig deeper into the personal development side of like, how am I going to grow my business? I realized that was not my stuff. That was their stuff. And it really allowed me to be like, I can change and evolve and iterate however I want to iterate. It's my business. I don't have to stay stuck in this thing. The same thing with pricing. I remember I had like a dozen social media clients, and they were all paying, I don't know, between $250 and $1,000, like, but they were all getting the same service. And I was like, I need to have a conversation with these people. And it was one of the scariest things I ever did, because I was like, I'm essentially like doubling and tripling people's prices. And half of them stayed, half of them left. But I ultimately made the same amount of money because I was charging what I felt was I was worth charging. And I think oftentimes we hold ourselves back from doing these things because we think, oh, we have to do this thing in this one way. And ultimately, like, we became entrepreneurs because we didn't want to work for somebody else. We wanted more freedom in our lives. We want to have choice freedom. We want to have money freedom. We want to have time freedom. And it breaks my heart when I see wildly talented people who are like these amazing experts in their business, and they let these little things hold them back. And so I think it's so cool what you do and how you tie all that together, because I spent probably 15 years, or maybe not 15, but 10 at least, being like, oh, I don't have a mindset issue. Like, hello, red flag. I totally have a mindset issue.
Yeah. And, and I think that's just like, that comes with the freedom of choice, right? Is that we get to fail forward and we get to make more wrong decisions and learn in the process. And, I don't believe there's ever a wrong decision. There's just a lesson with every decision that we make, right? And the more we, the more we are courageous in taking action towards trying to get where we want to go, the faster we'll learn what works and what doesn't. And I think, sometimes it's so hard to know what really worked, right? Because we're, as entrepreneurs, we're making so many decisions every day, and always evolving, always growing, always being inspired, always creating. But it really helps to, that's just why mentorship is so important, right? To have somebody to create that space, to get the clarity on what is actually going on and what's going on from your perspective, and then what's actually working, what's actually creating results, because it's so easy to get lost in the doing of all the things and, being all the things in all the different places and all the different, like departments in this. So it's so important to have that support so that you don't make too many wrong decisions and get burned and, have like your inspiration stomped out of you, which it can be easy to do if you go through a period of massive stress when things aren't working, right?
100%. And I don't think I know for me, nobody like warned me when I started my business that I would be the bookkeeper and the salesperson and the customer service and the operations and the marketer and the person who did the delivery. And I would spend, because a lot of, like, when I first started my business, a lot of it was like, I would go networking, and then I would be networking all day, and then I would write proposals, and then I'd do delivery. And I remember having like 12, 14, 16-hour days. And I'd be like, all I do is live and breathe this business, because, nobody tells you that when you start a business, that you have to wear all these hats. And I think, to your point, I think the joy of doing this thing that you're so passionate about can quickly be like sucked out of you if you don't delegate and like get to that point where you're comfortable being like, I'm just going to take this and hand it to an expert and they're going to do it in an hour, instead of me taking, 5 hours to figure out QuickBooks or whatever.
Yeah, I had the same thought too. I was like, if I had known I would have to do would have to do accounting to have a business, I never would have done it. And it's just been, we all have those different areas of like, this is where my skill set is. But it just goes to show, like, you can go a really long way just focusing on your strengths, right? And the rest will, like, it'll catch up with that, as you really focus on leveraging your strengths and your resources to grow your resources so that you can start to get help with all of the other areas that you maybe aren't so strong in. And that's all part of the fun too, right? The collaboration. Collaboration is the thing that makes it fun. And I think particularly when you're starting out and you're a solopreneur, especially as women, I was just having this conversation with another coach. Like, sometimes we put it all on ourselves to do everything, and we think we can do everything, but that's just a big self-sabotaging myth. And that's where the stress comes from, when we're putting too much on ourselves and we're not being strategic, and we're not being honest about what's working and what's not working, and what we're good at and what we're not good at. And it's, in bringing in the mentorship and the team as and when we can, like, that's when it starts to get really fun, because that opens you up to feel so much more creative, only focusing on the things that you're really good at.
Yeah, 100%. I always tell people to do a time study. Anytime I start to feel like crazy overwhelmed, I will do a time study where for 2 weeks, every 15 minutes, I will literally write down what I'm doing. And I'll be like, is this strategic or is this tactical? And I usually want to puke by the end of the 2 weeks, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm doing so much tactical stuff that I could hire somebody or create a system through technology to do. And if you're ever like, I always just like, do a 2-week time study. If you're feeling overwhelmed, do a 2-week time study and be like, okay, these are $10 an hour tasks or $15, whatever the number is. And if your time's worth more than that, like, and the average entrepreneur totally is, hire someone. I waited way too long to hire people.
I love that. And I think looking back on my journey as well, because I went through it, I started my business in the middle of a giant burnout from doing my master's and being working in the film industry. And I'm like, it was such a blessing in disguise, because I was physically unable to overwork. Like, I had to take loads of naps. I could only do very minimal. So it kind of forced me to have a really, really lean strategy and, focus on the things that would really work for me. And it's kind of as I, recovered and then got my energy back, that's when the overwhelm started to hit. And because I was able to take on more. And when I started to go through that learning curve with, more of the back end stuff in my business, and realizing that, the to-do list is literally never ending if we want it to be. So we have to be so strategic in where we're investing our time. And, it's always about boundaries, right? And tightening up our boundaries if we want to grow and expand and have fun. Then those types of conversations they have to happen. So I love that you shared that. Thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
So thank you so much. This has been such a great conversation. How can people find you and learn more about what it is that you're up to?
Yeah, so I'm Jamie Palmer on all Instagram, Facebook, social media. And you can connect with me there. I would say my favorite place to hang out is probably Instagram these days. So come on over there, and then, come say hi.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone. For more inspirational content, head over to my website withsarahmac.com, and please support the show by liking, commenting, and subscribing.